Want your game reviewed or just want to talk about Overwatch or anything in general? Feel free to send me a message on Discord by joining my server. Link is in the description. So high ground can be pretty important when it comes to positioning in Overwatch. You'll hear a lot of people talk about high ground and how important it is, and that you should be pretty much always taking high ground on certain characters. Generally, you'll see characters like Soldier 76, McCree, or Widowmaker on high ground, and there's a good reason for it. There are many advantages that come with being on high ground, and we're going to be going over those advantages in this video. So we're just going to be going over a few reasons as to why you should always consider taking the high ground. Starting off with number 1, vision. Using the high ground means you'll have better vision of the enemy, and they will have less vision of you. Now this may sound a little bit odd to you at first, but let me further explain my point. When high ground is used properly, you can manipulate the area around you in order to prevent yourself from being fully exposed. The way to use high ground properly is to not stand so far forward close to the edge. Instead, you want to stand further back, that way less of your character model is exposed, thus making you harder to hit. Furthermore, when you're high ground, if the enemy wants to attack you, you'll be forcing them to look upwards at you, which distracts them from looking at what's in front of them, which can lead to them dying if they aren't paying attention to their surroundings. Something to note is that high ground can be especially effective against projectiles, as they are more difficult to aim when shot from the low ground. Not only that, but you standing on high ground will mean that you have better vision of the battleground, giving you the ability to see more enemies and shoot over obstacles that enemies might be hiding behind, such as a Reinhardt shield or the environment. The second advantage to using high ground is choosing fights. Since you're on the high ground, that means you'll be the one who chooses when fights will happen. You can decide when it's time to have a fully engaged, committed fight, while the enemies on the low ground sort of just have to wait for that time to come. That means you'll have more control over the fight. So if you have the time to sit on high ground, you can wait for the right opportunity to jump onto your opponents, while they'll have to wait for you to come down. They'll somehow have to get you off of high ground, or they'll have to come up to you if they want to engage. If you're ever in danger from someone attacking you from the low ground, you can always just back up and use the floor that you're standing on to cut line of sight. After backing up, you can just use this time to either find a new position to attack from, or just heal up and then re-engage. The third advantage to using high ground is improved survivability. If you use the high ground, you limit the amount of characters which can directly reach you. A good example of this is Tracer. She doesn't have any sort of vertical mobility, which forces her to take a predictable path if she wishes to reach you. In some cases, if an ability is needed in order to gain height, then Tracer will struggle in order to get close enough to maximize her damage output. So what if someone on the enemy team is abusing the high ground? What do I do so that I can take control over it? Well, there are some characters to consider in this case. You have characters like Winston and Pharah, which can push people off the high ground. You also have characters like Genji, and in some cases Tracer, who can take out isolated targets. If multiple enemies are on the high ground, Winston's Primal Rage or Pharah's Concussive Blast can do the trick at pushing them off and retaking the high ground. If you notice that enemies on high ground are playing really aggressive, hooking them with Roadhog is a good solution. Now, there are other characters that can also retake the high ground, but these are just a few examples. Sometimes the matchup does matter depending on what character you're playing and who you're facing. It also depends on the situation. So let's go over 2 examples of good high ground. On Watchpoint Gibraltar, when you're defending, the plane on the second point is great. This high ground is really good due to the safety as well as the overall dominance this spot gives. So we're going to be going over the things that we learned and see how it applies to this situation. First off, standing on the plane, it being so high allows you to see all the entrances the enemies can come from. You can see all 4 doors they can enter from, leaving you in a situation where you won't likely be surprised. Next, being up here allows you to choose your fights regardless of what entrance they come from. Using the plane's structure, you can position yourself in a way which only exposes you to certain areas at a time. If you know they have an enemy soldier or McCree that is trying to kill you, you can choose which doors you want to expose yourself to so that you can possibly take an easier or better fight. In the same fashion, you can also isolate yourself in a duel with someone through one of these doors by only exposing yourself to one spot at a time to prevent yourself from taking a fight where you're outnumbered. And finally, being up here makes you harder to kill. Characters without long-range capabilities or vertical mobility are forced to walk up to the ship, which you can easily react to. Against characters like Winston, Genji, and D.Va, when you see them coming for you, you can back up on the plane before they dash up in order for you to keep your distance. For our second example, we will use the first point on Hanamura. When you're defending this point, a good high ground spot would be on top of this building. Similar to the plane on Watchpoint Gibraltar, this spot can be very dominant. Standing from this spot allows you to see both entrances the enemies can come from, once again leaving you in a position where you're difficult to surprise. You can choose your fights against characters without vertical mobility easily, as when things are looking bad, you can just back up and not expose yourself to them. While this spot is very open, you can move from side to side to prevent yourself from fully exposing yourself to both entrances. The only thing with this spot which differs from the plane is the distance from the entrances. The distance from the window is quite close, which can leave you in a position where a hero with vertical mobility won't have a tough time closing the gap on you. The good news is, only those heroes with vertical mobility will be taking this route. So if the enemy team isn't running any heroes with vertical mobility, then you won't don't have to worry about this window. Being up here, you can choose when you want to fight. If things are looking bad, like I said, you can just run off the building or back up and crouch and no longer expose yourself. The biggest difference with this spot compared to the plane on Watchpoint Gibraltar is that you have to be a lot more careful against these vertically mobile heroes, as, like I said, the distance between the window and where you're standing isn't very far. So just to recap once more on what we've learned, the main reasons you should be using high ground are: using the high ground properly will mean that you have more vision of the enemy and they will have less vision of you, you can have more control over the fights that you take, and you're being more difficult to kill on the high ground. So that does it for this video. Don't forget, if you'd like to have your game reviewed or just want to talk about Overwatch, the link to my Discord server is in the description. If you like educational Overwatch content, feel free to subscribe to see more, and if you'd like to further support me, then visit my Patreon page. The link to that is also in the description. Thanks for watching.